Good morning. This is Chris Conroy, Executive Vice President with Insurance Agency Marketing Services, or IAMS. And I welcome everybody to today's webinar program on the new NAIC Annuity Model Regulation 275 and an update on the new DOL Fiduciary Rule. We know that each of these regulations are going to have a significant impact on your business, and they are scheduled to take effect soon. The new NAIC model regulation will take effect January 1st in certain states, with many more states to follow in 2021. The new DOL Fiduciary Rule is set to take effect on February 16th, and we will share our insights on its likely trajectory today. Today's webinar will provide a lot of excellent information and some practical takeaways to help ensure that you're in compliance with the new NAIC model regulation, and also be more informed about the DOL Fiduciary Rule. Today's topic is titled Annuity Standard of Care Update, and we will focus on how you can best comply with these new regulations. As we've done with other webinars, I'm just pleased to bring you the best minds in the business, and to help navigate through these complex rules, we're pleased to have Mr. Kevin Meckley with North American. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Chris. Happy to be here.
And North American's been a great partner of the industry and of IAMS over many years, and we appreciate their leadership and sales, product, and today with their regulatory insights. Today's format's going to be relatively straightforward. Kevin and I will have a dialogue about these new regulations, and along the way, be on the lookout for a few polling questions to get your responses so we can follow up with you. If you have any specific questions, you can also ask those in the chat and dialogue box, and we'll try to get to those at the end of today's program. Before I get into introducing Kevin, I'd like to take a quick minute to share with the audience a quick summary of how IAMS helps provide our customers value in your business with us. First area that has really defined IAMS in these past 34 years in business is our strong back office support, designed to save you time and focus on working with your clients. From submission all the way through commission, we've had a comprehensive catalog of tools and resources, case support to help you ensure that you're receiving the best products and seamless case support that you'd expect from your IMO. Next, we're pleased to have our own instance of Firelight through IAM's website, which many of you are familiar with, and you would know that really helps expedite your case and minimizes time-consuming errors. Check with your marketer here for more details on how to get set up with Firelight. And another area that's really defined us as one of the premier distribution firms in the business is our creative marketing solutions team and the support that we provide to grow your business. As you'll see with many of our traditional and digital market resources here, we can really help you grow your client base. In particular, I encourage you to contact your marketer here to receive a free marketing analysis, where we can take a look at your current marketing assets and recommend strategies to generate greater client engagement and ultimately more customers. This is even more important today, but with the challenges faced by the pandemic, and many of our top producers this year that have grown their business in 2020 have partnered with us to transition their business to more of a hybrid model that incorporates digital and virtual marketing programs and client interaction tools. So reach out here, we can help you with a lot of those solutions, take a look at your business for you for free. Then last, I just want to draw your attention to the IAMS website, www.iamsinc.com. And there you can find many of the tools and resources to help grow your business. Again, contact your marketer here if you need help to get access to that website. A lot of great information there that we've built over the last 34 years. And now I'm pleased to introduce Kevin Meckley as our feature presenter today. Kevin is the Vice President of Legal and Director of Government Affairs for Salmons Financial Group. Kevin has a deep and broad experience in the insurance business, having worked at a leading compliance consulting firm and with several annuity carriers as an attorney. In his 15 years in the industry, he's worked with carriers and distribution firms, including myself, when I was with a carrier, and he's given us a unique compliance perspective given his interaction, having worked with producers and IMOs and broker dealers all over the country. So he brings a unique field perspective I think everybody will appreciate today. At Salmons, Kevin coordinates the government relations strategy for the company. He's connected with a lot of financial trades such as the IRI, ACLI, NALBA, NAFA, where he's on the executive committee and the former chair of the Government and Legal Affairs Committee. He's been closely tied to the NAIC best interest standard and the regulation, including the Department of Labor rules under the Obama administration, now under the Trump administration, where he's seen both the lobbying end of the business and the litigation side of the business, including the lawsuit that ultimately unwound that Obama rule, which North America, I believe, was a party to that lawsuit. So with that, welcome, Kevin, and I'll be handing it over to you.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. Thank you all for joining today. A couple of topics near and dear to my heart, as Chris intimated there. Here's a quick roadmap for today. We'll go over the new Model 275, that new best interest model that's going to be coming to a state near you very soon. A little quick DOL Fiduciary Rule update. We got some new action from the Trump administration, potentially from a Biden administration. We'll kind of see how that shakes out. And then a few predictions, right? We can't leave without at least putting a stake in the ground. So let's move on here, Chris. Let's get going here. Start with the overview of the NAIC Model 275. A beautiful picture of the Capitol there on a lovely day. Okay, here we go. So what is best interest? And this is the new standard, right? Replacing suitability. Suitability all of a sudden turned into a bad word. And now it's a best interest standard, sort of arising out of Reg BI at the SEC level. So the NAIC got together and decided, okay, we want to have something that looks sort of like Reg BI, but tied more to our world and the state sort of fixed annuity industry world, and sort of, you know, a little bit more uniform across the board. How do we do that? Well, first off, it's not fiduciary. They make it clear that it's not a fiduciary standard. They also make it clear that it's limited to the time the recommendation is made. This is good. This means that you don't have to have some ongoing obligation to have some long-standing, you know, best interest thing that's going to tie to this. It's really tied to what happened at the time of sale. And then these two new big things. There's a new test. We're calling it a 50% plus one. Essentially, what this says is you got to put the customer ahead of yourself. It's not the old DOL rule that said, you know, you couldn't consider at all your own, you know, financial well-being. It says you just have to put the customer ahead of yourself. And then the last part are these new 4 key obligations. And let's jump into those, Chris. So again, this financial interest test, part 1, don't put the customer behind you, put the customer ahead of you. That's easy. 50% plus one. I think most producers do that every day when they're recommending a product to the customer to fit their needs and goals. But these new obligations, this is the new part. There's a care obligation, a disclosure obligation, a conflict of interest obligation, and a documentation obligation. These 4 obligations. Now, why are there these obligations? Look, when we were trying to make this thing, when we were working with the NAIC, we made it clear we don't want a subjective, you know, squishy best interest standard that would allow regulators and lawyers and God bless them after the fact to come back and say, look, we don't think this was best interest at all. This is what happened after, you know, the sale. And we wanted it to be clear. Look, if you check these boxes, if you give a producer a process-driven approach, okay, I selected care obligation. I did that. I did my disclosure. I did my conflict of interest. I did my documentation. I feel really good that I acted in the best interest of that customer and you are deemed compliant. I like that. That makes the process, that gives you guys a sort of a checklist to just cross off and make sure you're doing, you know, a compliant process and that you've acted in the best interest. That's what we wanted. We wanted something that you could just follow and not have this real squishy, you know, subjective after the fact potential that we were concerned about.
Yeah, Kevin, and you know, those 4 things we'll jump into in just a quick second. The financial interest one's kind of an interesting one. I think every producer, no matter what license you have, would say that they act in that client's best interest. And
sure,
is that one going to look a little bit subjective? If it's ever questioned, you know, is it more focused on, boy, did you just kind of focus on the highest comp product and it turns out there were other things that would have provided a better guaranteed benefit, or what does that look like, you think, in practice?
Yeah, good question. I think in general, this test, and we call it a test, it's not really defined as a test in the model, but it's the easiest way to sort of describe it. I think what we'll find is that if you see the care obligation, the next obligation, it will be hard to comply with a care obligation and if you have recommended a product that doesn't put the customer ahead of yourself. In other words, all this will sort of be tied together. If you've got just a totally egregious, sale, I think you're just going to know it. This is really more of a bad actors sort of test, in my opinion. I don't think you're going to
Right.
see a lot of reliance on that little thing for a regulator trying to gotcha. I just don't see that happening much. I think it will still, there will still be cases that arise where there was something that just went really poorly. But if you're trying, if you're working in good faith on this, I think it's going to be extremely hard to ever really kind of catch anybody on that test.
Gotcha. Yeah, and the insurance companies we'll talk about later have some skin in the game, and so I'm sure they're going to be looking these over. Let's move over to care then. Talk to us about number one, the care obligation.
Yeah, so this is that first of the four obligations, and a lot of this is going to look familiar. That's the good part about this new reg is that some of it is it's a lot of new words, but I think you'll find that you'll be pretty comfortable with it once you read some of the requirements because a lot of it you're doing today. And here's the care obligation. Here's what it requires. It requires you to know your customer situation and objectives. Well, of course you do that. I mean, you have to in order to make a recommendation. You have to understand your own products that are available to you. So it's kind of a know your customer, know your product suite. You can do those two things. You do that today. The third one, and this is new language, have a reasonable basis to believe that your recommendation effectively addresses the consumer need. So that new language, effectively address, it's no longer must be suitable, right? Reasonable basis for suitability. That was the old standard. Now it must effectively address the consumer's needs. What does effectively address mean? Is it different than best interest? Is it different than suitability? It's kind of a squishy middle ground, but it doesn't say have a reasonable basis to believe you recommended the best product. It says you have to make a recommendation that addresses that consumer needs. I think you do that today. I think you can feel pretty comfortable with that as well. And the last part, this is new as well. You have to communicate the basis or bases of the recommendation to the customer. And we recommend doing that in writing. I mean, in a perfect world, that's something that you provide to the customer. You say, look, we recommended this great North American product. Here's why I recommend it. Here's the basis of my recommendation. It fit your needs and goals based on this, this, and this. You give that to the customer, boom, you're done. You can do it orally if you have a customer that doesn't, necessarily respond as well to written information. But you'll find in a couple minutes that it might be best to write it down as well. So any thoughts there, Chris, or questions?
Oh, yeah, I think the biggest takeaway I'd say is give us a call here at IAMS. I mean, number two is kind of know your product. I think everybody knows that, but you kind of, I think, have a specific responsibility to understand that suite. So, we're privy to the hundreds of products that are out there, and if it's North American, whether, is this, hey, I know about Versa Choice, but I don't know about Performance Choice or Income Choice. A lot of choice products you guys like there. And, which one do you choose, right? So, I think let us help you with that just so that we're kind of giving you what you need to know in order to comply with this regulation. Let's move over to the next one, number two, under
Yeah, and
care.
this is important. This is a new sort of section regarding replacements. So this is still the care obligation, but they have a little subsection about replacements where they do change some language. This is new stuff. You got to consider the whole transaction, and you got to consider, whether they lose benefits or all that stuff that you would normally do. But here's the new stuff. The replacing product must substantially benefit the customer over that replaced product over the life of the product. So those are the two big keys there. And then the last one you see there, a consideration also has to be whether that product has been replaced in the preceding 60 months. So new replacement, new language, you have to be able to show that it will substantially benefit the customer. So not just benefit, but this new substantially benefit the customer over the life of the product. So not just at the time of sale, over the life of the product. And a consideration has to be whether there's been a replacement or not within the preceding 60 months. Anything there, Chris?
Well, yeah, so that substantial benefit, I guess our California, Minnesota producers would be familiar with that. That's, I think, their current regulation. So that's not just hey, you're, with the premium bonus, you're $1 ahead. It would probably need to be something more than that.
Yeah.
Again, having to take the lens of, okay, well, yeah, well, I'm going to put you a new set of surrender charges, but understand how's that going to pay off in the long run, and if they are money ahead, and maybe it's a product with better features and crediting mechanisms, that would all factor into that substantial benefit, but it can't just be another dollar or more, right?
Yeah, you got to be able to tell the whole story, right? This is not a day one replacement requirement anymore. After the transaction, they're ahead. You have to be able to
Hmm.
show that they're going to be ahead over the life of the product relative to that replaced product. And the other thing on that preceding 60 months thing, I think some think that is a red line. Oh crap, I can't replace product if it's just a consideration. If there's extenuating circumstances where it makes total sense to move, then that it would still be allowed. It's just a factor that you must consider. So that they made it clear that it's a consideration.
And that one, that 60-month rule, I mean, every carrier is going to have their own interpretation of what that means, how strict, so to speak, they are. And,
Probably.
wouldn't be surprised if their suitability departments, are going to come to some general rules of thumb around that. So that's going to vary from carrier to carrier. Let's move on then to number 2, the disclosure obligation.
Yeah, so this is the second of those four, and there's really three subparts. I'm going to focus on the first one. That's the key. There's a new producer disclosure that you have to give to the customer under this new rule. And it sort of looks like Form CRS, if you're familiar at all with Reg BI. This is their response to that at the state level. You have to provide this disclosure that describes the relationship between you and the customer, as well as some other things about you, including products you can offer, the types of companies you can offer, and how you're paid. Not what you're paid, but how you're paid, via commission or et cetera. The second little column there says cash compensation disclosure. There's a new requirement as well that says if the customer asks you, then you do need to provide additional information about your cash compensation. So you can express it as a range or percentage, but you are required, if they ask about it, to provide more information about how you or what you are paid. And then this third column here, informing consumers of annuity features. The good news is most of that stuff that's in this model, we already do today in other disclosures that most companies will have. So I'm just not even going to talk about that. I don't want to waste your time. So those are the three parts, though, to the new disclosure obligation. And Chris, maybe if you go to that next slide, if you got a question, I just want to show this though.
Yeah.
This
So
is
this
a
is,
Yeah, go ahead.
Kevin, this is your sample form, North Americans, and suspect other carriers might be coming out with something like this.
Yeah, this is word for word directly out of the model. So the model gave us what they called Appendix A as this is how they wanted it to be worded. So what we did, you could probably make some changes if it's substantially similar to this form. You could probably use a different form. This is the one that we were just like, screw it. We're just going to put word for word exactly what the regulators want, and we're just going to give producers this form to use. It doesn't have our branding on it. You might see some companies that do have branding. Some companies I think most companies are going to require you to submit this with new business. Some may not, but they will require you to keep it and be able to produce it on the back end. There's going to be a lot of differences, I think, within carriers on how this works. But this is essentially what that disclosure looks like. Look, it just has information about you, what types of products you can sell, whether you have a securities license or not, whose annuities, whether you can sell just one company or a captive agent, or you can sell through lots of
Hmm.
companies, and how you're paid. So those are the big things that it's not a scary form. It's just frankly, it's another piece of paper, right? That we all have to fill out and put in front of the customer. Preferably, and here's the thing, we want to get this out to the customer early in the process. It's technically supposed to be given prior to recommendation because it's supposed to give them an upfront view of who you are. Do I want to work with this producer because they only offer, this particular set of products, and I want someone who can offer lots of products? Or is this producer perfect for me because they're paid on commission? I don't want to pay somebody for ongoing, advice or whatever. So it allows you to get that in front of the customer.
Let me launch a polling question here. As I mentioned, we'll have a couple of these. If folks would like a free copy of this, we can make sure it's available. It's available on the North American website as well. But if you would like this, go ahead and answer yes. I'd be happy to, follow up and get that information out to you. We'll have another thing about the blueprint that North America's put together. But if you're interested in a copy of that, go ahead and answer yes, and then I'll just close that poll here in a second. Okay. Thank you. And let's see, moving on to the next slide there, Kevin. You can see that number 3 of 4, conflict.
Yeah, conflict of interest. And give me one more click forward, Chris. There's
Yep.
this is the third obligation. You have to identify and avoid or manage and disclose conflicts of interest to the customer. And it gets a little tricky here because they didn't define a conflict as what a reasonable person would expect to influence the impartiality of your recommendation. But then they go in to say, but look, cash and non-cash comp are not just in and of themselves conflicts of interest. So the only explicit example the NAIC provided was that it's an ownership interest, so maybe in the firm or company. This is a little confusing, I think, to most people, including, frankly, myself, on what a conflict is. The best advice we've been giving producers is if you have a question, probably best to disclose it. But the NAIC is working on some new FAQs right now to provide more guidance for implementation of this rule. And we expect them to give a little bit more color around this section. So maybe some more information to come on this. But as of now, if you have a question, maybe contact IAMS or contact the company. We'll give you our thoughts. But if it's a question, maybe it's just worth just disclosing it and calling it good. But that's the conflict of interest obligation.
Yes, well, I don't know, Kevin, that there's too many 6-syllable words in there. Impartiality,
Yeah,
so
I know. You
I
get a
think
bunch of lawyers in a room. Look, this is what happens.
so we'll see. I think you're right. FAQs are going to probably help clarify that. I got to think, hey, if I buy 100 shares of some publicly traded insurance companies, it's worth $1,000 and the market cap's 10 billion. I can't believe that would be a conflict that can't be reconciled. But we'll see what comes from that FAQs. Let's move over to number 4.
Yeah, so the documentation, this is the last one of those 4. And you basically, it comes down to 2 things that the producer has to do. You have to write down, so make a written record of any recommendation you make. So you met with customer on this day and you recommended X product, preferably, of course, a North American product. You write down that you recommended that North American product and that this was the reason. This is part 2, the written record of the basis for that recommendation. You'll remember earlier we said that if one of the requirements of the care obligation is you have to communicate why you recommended that product to the customer. This is the point at which I said you might want to write it down because and provide it to the customer in writing, because ultimately to comply with this thing, you got to have a written record of all of this. So I think a lot of producers do this today. Back in the many eons ago, I worked in complaints at an insurance company, my first job in the industry. But let me tell you how much fun that was. Great producers always had this great written record of what happened. It was a lot easier to defend those complaints and say, look, at the time of sale, this is what the customer said, this is what the producer did, and they wrote down this nice narrative, a couple paragraphs, and it's a lot easier to defend. Now they're sort of building this into the model. So a lot of folks do it already, but this would be something that you'll need to do on a go-forward basis under this rule, is write down, what happened at the time of sale, the product you recommended, and why. And I think some companies will require this as part of the submission. I don't think we are going to be requiring it with all new business, but we'll probably ask some producers for it on the back end from time to time as part of our sort of sampling for compliance obligations we have. So it's good to keep it on file, keep it in your records, and pretty simple at the end of the day.
So one thing here, I guess 2 things. One kind of practical consideration is I would encourage everybody, if you're not already doing it, keep your files electronically. The worst thing is you got a paper file, you lose it, it goes missing. And this could be years later when somebody comes and asks it. So, have a repository to keep all those electronically. And then second is just a qualitative question. We kind of joked there, had a little gratuitous plug for North American, but tell me this, would company rating be a factor that maybe would be a basis for the recommendation? And I'll mention, North American, I think you just got reaffirmed at A+ by AM Best, so congrats there. But is that a factor too?
We are very, very proud of our ratings at North American, as you mentioned, A+ across the board. But I would say with my compliance and legal hat on that is not the only basis upon which you should recommend a product, but it is a basis that you can recommend a product on. It's definitely a factor, Chris, is the best way to say it. Some people are, they are very concerned about that, particularly in, economic, times that we have right now with some instability, looking at record low interest rates and how carriers are handling all that. I mean, in some ways, ratings really matter. And you want to be able to tell a customer, look, the money that you're giving, we're sending to this insurance company is pretty darn safe as it's related to other areas, and here's an A+ rating to demonstrate that. That's a basis. It shouldn't be the basis for the sale. For instance, if you're doing a replacement and you only write down company ratings, that's probably going to be tough to get through, a suitability process. But it is definitely a factor that I think you can consider for sure.
Gotcha. Let's talk about other producers that might be working with that particular client.
Yeah, so this is another new section in the model. It's a little confusing to some people. I'll try to distill it here. We call it the producer daisy chain requirement. They don't call it that, but that's what we call it. Essentially what it says is, look, if you have a split case scenario where you got direct compensation being paid to more than one agent and from one sale, if that second producer, the producer that wasn't necessarily upfront with the customer, if they have exercised material control or influence in the making of that recommendation, regardless of whether they met with the customer and they received that direct comp, they need to also be complying with all the rules in this model and the rules of this regulation. So there's a couple takeaways there. Again, material control or influence. So they have to actually been involved in sort of what happened with the recommendation. And two, they got to receive the comp. Now, they carve out a few things. Look, if you're just, giving educational materials or marketing materials, maybe you were the one that ran a seminar and someone else is doing it, wholesaling, back office support. I think some of that general supervision, all that stuff would mean that you're not having control or influence. But if you really were, look, I looked at this product or I either met with this customer or looked at their files and said, hey, this product might make the most sense for you. Probably can, exercise material control or influence. So just something to keep in mind in those situations where you do have maybe a split case scenario or that, you work with other agents.
Yeah, and that's something we can help you with. I think, generally, I mean, if it's an upline who splits a case because they're providing, back office support, et cetera, but really aren't involved with the client, sounds like those scenarios probably aren't within the scope, but, reach out to us. We can help you with that. Let's move on to the next one, the safe harbor that affects broker dealers and RIAs.
Yeah, so this is there's already a safe harbor in today's suitability rule. That, remember, this whole suitability thing really arose from FINRA. And because of that, they said, look, if you're a broker dealer and you're already complying with FINRA, you don't need to comply with our new suitability model because it's essentially the same thing. Here they looked at it and said, okay, we need to look at the safe harbor again because FINRA has not yet adopted fully a best interest standard. So they said, okay, we will allow a safe harbor for a comparable standard. And what they called a comparable standard essentially is like, Reg BI. So if you're a broker dealer and you are, putting fixed annuity products or FIAs both into your Reg BI framework, you don't have to comply with this model, with this new reg, because you're complying with something that is comparable to it. But if you are working with a broker dealer that doesn't adopt Reg BI or a comparable standard, then you do have to follow this standard. And some broker dealers may even choose not to use Reg BI, but otherwise follow this new rule. So the takeaway here is talk to your broker dealer and how they plan to incorporate new Model 275 into those states that you're in. So and from what we've heard, a lot of broker dealers are kind of in different spots on this. So it might just be very specific to your BD.
So moving on to training, more training. What is this going to stop? So tell us what we need to know here.
Well, the good news is it'll stop after you take 1 credit hour course. If you've already taken your required annuity, 4-hour course, which I assume most of you have if you're on this webinar, you are required to take an additional 1-time 1 credit training course on this new model if you're in one of those states that has adopted this rule. The good news is in most states you should have 6-month sort of safe harbor to take the training. So let's say you're in Arizona and Arizona is going to adopt this thing on January 1st. You have until July 1st to take the training. before companies like ours start NIGOing business based on you haven't taken the training. So the takeaway is get the training done if you're in one of those states early on, so you don't have to deal with any NIGO issues. And then it does say 4-hour credit training course. That really just means if you've never taken your annuity training, again, probably won't address anybody on this call, but it will require the new a new standard as well. So you wouldn't have to take the 1 credit. The 4-hour will implement the new stuff. So otherwise, not much to be known here, other than it'll still be like, Reg Ed or LIMRA or outside companies that'll be doing that.
More forms too. Tell
How
us
about
about that.
that? Yeah, so we already talked about the first one, producer disclosure form. That's that new disclosure you got to give to customers. Something we're doing in that top right box is a producer attestation form. Every company is going to do something like this, either a standalone form or they'll put new attestations like in their suitability forms. But essentially, it's just going to say to the customer and to you that you're going to attest that you've complied with these new obligations, that you're familiar with them, that you understand them, that you've complied. Because we've got some stake in the game, as Chris mentioned earlier, to ensure that you guys are doing these things. Because we can't be there at the time of sale, it's just sort of our reminder to you guys that you're doing them and that we can rely on that. The bottom two, these are forms we already have today, obviously suitability form and comparison form, but we are rebranding our suitability form to call it a consumer profile form. That's what this model requires. We're going to do that in all states. It's essentially the same form. There's a couple tweaks, but if you see something called a consumer profile form and you're like, what the heck is this? It's just a suitability form. We just renamed it. Some other companies will probably do the same thing. Eventually, all companies will do the same thing because that's what this model requires. But otherwise, not much here. Just a couple new forms, couple new pieces of paper that'll be in the app.
Kevin, another good reason to use Firelight, because a lot of this will be up on Firelight for the different carriers, and it would be an easy way to check the box electronically.
I can't speak for all carriers, but for ours, we will have all of these forms, everything in eApp and ready to go for you. So yes, as it relates to North American, for sure. Can't speak to everybody.
So timing and compliance, we got a couple states. I think you mentioned Arizona, Iowa, but a whole lot more coming, right?
Yeah, Arizona, Iowa, Rhode Island, they're all done with this thing coming. At least in Arizona, Iowa, coming on 1/1. But there's like 22, 23 states that are going to adopt this very soon, probably most in the first quarter. So we're going to be seeing a lot of adoption of this thing. If you're not in Iowa, Arizona, or Rhode Island, I could promise you that this thing is coming to you very soon. You're going to be out ahead of it. So watch your email inboxes. I'm sure companies like mine will be reaching out, or IAMS will be letting you know. But a majority of states are going to take this thing up within the next year. We expect that once a lot of states have taken this on, particularly big states, that insurers are just going to rip the Band-Aid off and just require this across the board. So it will just be the new standard, even in those states that haven't adopted it, because it will be easier for us and probably easier for you if you're in multiple states to do so. And plus, like we said, we don't think this thing is too terribly scary. We think it's workable. Get that training done, like we talked about, and then otherwise, it's pay attention to what IAMS is providing you, pay attention to what your carriers are providing you, and I think this is going to be a pretty easy transition.
So you got skin in the game for carriers. So you got, what does this show up on market conduct exams? That's how you get dinged sometimes?
Yeah, everything is open on these things, right? You got regulators looking at your business, coming in and doing market conduct exams. You theoretically could have counsel coming in and trying to challenge things. So we have new supervision procedures that we have to do as a result of this thing too. There's actually quite a few. We've got a new standard to review too as well that mirrors up with yours. We have to detect non-compliant recommendations. This is sort of a broad new requirement. That's why we have to do that attestation form. You'll see a lot of companies have that sort of thing. We've got a new requirement to ensure that you guys are providing that disclosure to the customer, which is why a lot of carriers are going to require it to just be submitted. So we don't have to do anything. We just see that it was done, boom, great, we can move on. And then this last one here, there's a new requirement to identify and eliminate sales contests based on sales of single products over a limited period of time. So what this sort of comes straight from Reg BI. It essentially means that they don't want those sort of fourth quarter fire sales on one individual product. So like a fourth quarter VersaChoice, commission bonus won't be allowed anymore under this rule. Now, again, it says a limited period of time. So you could still do probably year-long programs, which North American provides, that are not necessarily tied to one single product. So all FIA sales over the course of a year would likely still be allowed under this. They're really getting at those single product promotions that are very limited in scope. And then Chris, I think we have a couple more.
Yeah, I want a question on that too. Just if you know the
Sure.
subjective answer here, maybe. So IMOs, we do for example, we've had a marketing summit, which is it's frankly an educational event in part, but it's also a reward, networking opportunity. So that's based on total sales, all carriers. I mean, generally, would you think that'd be okay?
Yeah, I mean, at least as it relates to this rule, that's not touching anything that's a limited period of time or a single product. So I generally would think yes. The open question, I suppose, is whether there's any sort of weird conflict, question. But boy, I'm not seeing it based on just a strict reading of this. So I would feel fairly comfortable that at the IMO level in particular, that would be still pretty safe.
So additional stuff here. What are you seeing for the carrier?
Yeah, we already talked about the replacement stuff, so we'll have some new things on that. That new safe harbor stuff, we still have to monitor even if the broker dealer has it. And the new record keeping requirements, we have to hold on to more stuff, which is probably why some companies will have you send in more stuff. That's what we talked about above, with that producer disclosure form and asking you from time to time about documenting the basis of the sale. So just one quick slide here. We hope that, based on what you're seeing here in this webinar and what you'll see in some of the resources that we have available on our producer microsite on this issue, that we are, try to be best in class on compliance resources, not just fluff, not just long pieces of paper that say all kinds of rule stuff. We try to make it, very applicable to what you need to know to comply. And you saw that with DOL if you were working with us back then. As Chris mentioned, we were a named plaintiff. We had our, necks out there naming our company in the lawsuit that ultimately helped get to a great success in the Fifth Circuit. We put our necks out there because we think it's important to back up producers on this stuff, and we want to do the same here. So we have a new compliance blueprint that really talks about everything you need to know about this rule that's out there on our producer microsite. And then we've got a much smaller sort of cheat sheet we're calling the Doing Business Blueprint. This is the 2-pager you just keep right next to you. You make sure until you get comfortable with the rule. It really just explains what you need to do to comply and get your business submitted without any NIGO issues. So we're proud of those and happy to partner with IAMS here to get those in front of you if you guys would like.
Yeah, and that, Kevin, I'm going to launch a polling question here. The compliance bulletin, which is very well done. Good work there. If people would like that compliance blueprint, it's really simple to read. It's nuts and bolts, but it also, if you want details, it's there's info in there. So go ahead and answer yes. We'll get that compliance blueprint back out to you if you'd like to read a little bit more. So keep that open here for a couple seconds. Okay, thank you. And so now we're moving on. This will be a quick kind of summary. We have the DOL Fiduciary Rule update, and Kevin and I are pretty closely tied with NAFA, National Association for Fixed Annuities, serve on the board of directors. So we've been watching this closely. We've been lobbying. We've been putting a lot of behind the scenes work to make sure we're representing the interests of producers like yourself. So we want to give an update because it was published in the Federal Register, right, Kevin?
Yeah. So look, we obviously know that the old fiduciary rule, as you see there, vacated in 2018. That was a win. And the SEC sort of picked up the ball and ran with it with Reg BI. That got done earlier this year. And as we've noted in previous slides here, the NAIC did their thing. That's that bottom part. And then the Trump Labor Department put out a notice that they too wanted to sort of finalize and put a bow on what happened after the Obama rule was vacated. And there's a couple things they did. The first thing they did was they said back in July, look, because this whole thing was vacated, we need to reinstate what was basically the pre-Obama changes to what it means to be a fiduciary. And so they reinstated into the rules just and basically just had to do this to sort of clean up the mess that happened after the rule was vacated. So it sort of exists as if the Obama era sort of rules were never ever done. And so it's this old 1975 5-part test to determine who a fiduciary is. They re-upped that, so that was good. Industry was like, great, that's what it should be, we're good to go. But then they did two more things. They provided a new PTE, and it's a prohibited transaction exemption. You might recall if you made it through the old DOL rule that I'll keep the ERISA stuff light here, but essentially, if you are a fiduciary, if you qualify under the 5-part test, and you receive commissions, a commission itself is a prohibited transaction. You're not allowed to get those unless you have an exemption, a prohibited transaction exemption, a PTE. And if you comply with that PTE, then you can accept commissions and you're good. So there was that, the old BICE, the best interest contract exemption that industry hated. And they also had 8424. Those were the two exemptions we could use back in the day. Well, they basically said, look, if you are a 5-part test, if you meet that new test for fiduciary again, now in the new world, we're going to give you another PTE that you can use that sort of aligns with Reg BI. And again, industry was broadly supportive of this because it sort of cleans it up. It allows for regulatory alignment with other regulators. And our specific niche industry and sort of the fixed annuity world was happy with this on its face because the 1975 5-part test would mostly keep our sort of products and our advice out of the scope of fiduciary. So we were sort of ignoring this, to be candid, hoping that the Trump administration would get this right. Unfortunately, we don't really think they did, and there's a couple reasons why. The main reason is that as part of this PTE that they provided to the industry, it said that we are going to reinterpret that 5-part test. So the old 5-part test we used to use to keep our producers out of fiduciary status because it said that you have to make regular rendering of advice on a regular basis to consumers pursuant to a mutual agreement. So essentially, we always thought, look, a regular basis and mutual agreement, like this is not stuff we do. We don't have a requirement, for instance, that once you sell that annuity, you then have to, manage it, right? That's a fiduciary. We just sell the annuity and then you might check in with them from time to time and maybe do some new business and other things like that. That is not an ERISA fiduciary. The Fifth Circuit agreed when we got the old rule punted. But the Trump administration here decided, no, look, we think that regular basis can actually be pretty much broad, and that even if you are just an insurance producer recommending an index annuity, that does not necessarily mean you don't satisfy regular basis. It's a facts and circumstances approach. So we have to look at what happened at the time of sale. Did you say that you're going to check in with them every year? Did you say that, every few months you're going to check in and see how the product's going? Did you recommend other products to them? Do you manage their money on the side, as an RIA? All of these things are facts and circumstances which could create a regular basis under which the 5-part test would potentially get you into fiduciary world. This is scary because this means that, okay, crap, now we're fiduciaries, we need a PTE again. We got to go deal with that in order to get commissions. All of that, this sort of preamble to the PTE where they wrote lots of words about what they mean, that's where they wrote this reinterpretation. We did not like this at all and pushed back pretty hard on it in the proposal. Now, just a few weeks ago, we got the final thing printed and the final rule done after the comment period and all that stuff. And what we come to find out is, gosh darn it, the Trump administration really didn't listen all that much. And the final rule includes a lot of this same stuff, which is kind of a pain. So basically what it means as we sit right now is that if you are advising in a rollover of a 401k to an IRA or an IRA to an IRA, and you basically give a recommendation and then provide some ongoing advice or ongoing relationship and and all these other sort of things. And even if you disclaim fiduciary status altogether, you still might qualify. And this is a problem because this will now require you to have a PTE. Companies are still digging into this thing. I know I'm still digging into this thing. I've sort of got PTSD from this last time around, but we are back to trying to figure out what this all means. Last thing I want to say on this real fast, Chris, this is a Trump rule that did not get done fast enough. So think about, we have a Biden administration taking over. Anything that doesn't have an effective date within 60 days, or that's within 60 days of inauguration, the new administration can pause it. They can write basically a note to all their cabinet secretaries and say, pause anything that it's not effective yet. And this is one of those rules. They didn't get it done in time. So the PTE, the new PTE they proposed, is likely to get punted. The Biden administration will likely revisit it and do their own thing. But the problem is that preamble, the words that they wrote before the PTE, probably are not going to be punted, because again, they made the change back in July that the 5-part test has been re-upped into the Federal Register. That's the rule. And they basically gave us the test, the answers, what they mean by that with their reinterpretation. That's probably going to stand, and that sucks. So we're going to be working through this, trying to figure out what to do. But that's kind of I know there's a lot of, probably a little confusing, but I tried to keep it as high level as possible.
There's a lot there. I guess I'd just remind everybody, this applies. The Department of Labor has authority over, tax preferred plans here, qualified money. So there isn't some argument, oh, it's only 401ks. This is rollover recommendations from ERISA plans. This is IRA to IRA. So it's really, that's 2/3 of all annuity sales. And I can't imagine we have a producer that only works with non-qualified money. So it's going to have broad coverage. As Kevin mentioned, I mean, it could very well be punted, even inauguration day. He'll just, Biden may just suspend everything, and ultimately it may be, quick down the road. To be safe, I think people are wanting to know, what's going to happen potentially on February 16th if that doesn't happen with regard to this rule. And also, as Kevin mentioned, the preamble, which again, it kind of effectively, I'll ask you in a second here, is what the import of that is. But I guess the remedy, Kevin, if there were a violation of this rule or even the interpretive guidance, what does that practically mean to the producer and also to the status of that qualified plan that the advisor is working on?
Yeah, so it's not totally clear because we've never really had this exact sort of situation play out. There's been other sort of ERISA violations and PTE violations, and a lot of times if it's just a one-time thing, it will go to, this is an administrative group, right? We're talking about administrative judges. We're not talking about private rights of action, although it's possible that could go that way too under ERISA. But mostly it's you have to correct it. There's some potential excise taxes that would have to be paid. There's some fines that theoretically could be paid, and it could impact the producer, him or herself. So we want to get this right, but at the end of the day, unless it's a massive sort of class deal where, boy, and again, this comes down to a couple things. If you are complying with a PTE, you have to hit all those requirements, including, and you might remember this fun one, reasonable compensation. And so reasonable compensation, for instance, let's say it's been challenged and they said you paid unreasonable compensation, Chris, you are in trouble. The remedy is not necessarily you unwind everything and you kill it. It's you have to figure out what was unreasonable and fix that part. And it's not necessarily fixing the whole thing. I'm not an ERISA expert, so I don't want to dive too deep into this, but the problem is it's not so much a one single transaction thing. It's that, if you do a lot of this, and we certainly do a lot of this at the company, we're advising the qualified space, lots of qualified products, it would be more of a concern of doing it wrong for a lot of people. And that's why we want to try to get it right. And 8424 may be a possibility on that. I think, Chris, you wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, I was going to say, stay tuned. I mean, we're gonna have to find out more about this. I mean, it could be inauguration day or it's quickly thereafter where this rule gets bounced, but then there's a lot of insiders who say, boy, we still think this interpretive guidance, which basically expands the scope of who's a 5-part fiduciary to virtually everybody who's selling annuities, even if you're not an investment advisor. You're probably within the scope of that. If that's the kind of the working premise, then I think there's a lot to consider. Whether people would have to go through that 8424, which is largely a disclosure-based regime. I mean, there is standard of care there that's different. Talks about disclosure of compensation. So in some regards, what we just talked about at the NAIC level, that form may end up looking a lot like 8424 if that's what carriers decide to do. We're going to keep on top of this here at IAMS, and various carriers are probably going to handle this different ways. We'll help you navigate all those pathways, and what one carrier says or North American says, and making sure you're jumping through those things. But we want to make sure we give everybody a good update on where that stands, and with this DOL Fiduciary Rule, which, as you said, I mean, for whatever reason, I think maybe because the industry had so many comments back, they just weren't able to get it under the gun under the 60 days.
Yeah, and it probably wouldn't have mattered anyway. I mean, the Biden administration was committed, I think, to review this thing either way. It would have made it a step more difficult for a Biden administration to revisit had they got it done in time. They did not get it done in time, but they did kind of squirrely get this preamble thing in there. So maybe they view that as a win. Like I said, I'm not going to commit on behalf of North American exactly how we're going to approach this thing. It's still, I mean, this thing just came out, within the past, 10, 15 days. So we're still diving into all the language, what it means for us and what it means for you. But rest assured, more information is likely coming. We wanted to get it in this thing because you're likely to see a lot of trade press, and maybe already have on this thing sort of maybe being back and how it could impact you.
So we got just a couple more minutes. Stay on, folks. Predictions. So put on your Svengali powers here, Kevin. Two quick questions, and then I got one quick thing, and we'll wrap up today. So these are kind of questions. If you had one thing you could you might point to on each of these, Kevin. What do you see happening at the NAIC state level, and then what do you see at the federal level?
Yeah, state level, we're going to see a lot more adoption of this Model 275 we talked about in the first several slides. If you're not in a state that's got it right now, you're likely to be very soon. A ton of states have some things going on it. What our job is going to be, what my job is going to be throughout the 2021, I think, is convincing certain states not to go rogue on that, right? They want to adopt something, and all of a sudden they start adopting something different than the model. Maybe they see the Biden administration reviewing Reg BI at the SEC or reviewing DOL and decide, look, we kind of like the direction they're going. We're going to make some changes, but we're going to do it in line with that, not with this model. That's the scary part when we start having sort of one-off states doing their own thing. I suspect there will be some of that, and we're going to be sort of whack-a-moling those states as much as we can to try to get them in line with the model, which we support. We support the model. We don't support them going and doing their own thing. So that's something to watch in 2021. In terms of federal legislative, regulatory, we mentioned DOL, we mentioned SEC. The other thing that, with a likely split government, I know that's sort of still up in the air with what happens in Georgia on the 5th, but assuming a split government, I don't think a lot's going to happen legislatively in Congress, but there might be some runway for some new retirement legislation that will sort of piggyback on the Secure Act from last year. And that there is some, there's some progress, some positive progress, a bipartisan progress on that. It's going to take bipartisan support, broad bipartisan support. It might be the one of very few things that we can get past in a split government scenario. So something to watch there.
Well, some important disclosures here, Kevin, from Salmons. And I want to launch one polling question as we're wrapping things up here for everybody. And just to get your feedback is, have any other IMOs offered some kind of best interest programs like that? We'd love to get your feedback about that. Certainly we want to provide great value to our producers and good information takeaways so what you need to do to comply. And I suspect we're one of the early ones to share this information, and we're going to continue to do that so that you can comply. And as I mentioned, kickoff, I mean, part of what we do at times is we're not only are building your business, but we're protecting your business so that you're going to stay out of trouble. So thanks for responding there to those questions. And it looks like 92% haven't heard anything from anybody else. So I guess indeed we are ahead of the curve here. But
How
you know,
about
I
that?
would encourage you, I would encourage you to like us on Facebook and LinkedIn. Many of you done that. We've also launched the IAMS app recently, so talk to your marketer about that. And you know, again today, thank you, Kevin, for those great insights. Appreciate your time.
Thank you. Happy to do it.
And thank you, North American, for sponsoring this event and your partnership. Always top of the, you know, ahead of the curve and given, you know, where the ball's headed. And we appreciate all the help there. Call us here. Call your marketer at 800-255-5055. And we can get you that follow-up information. I know a lot of you responded asking for the blueprint disclosures. If there's anything else in there you'd like to chat about or ask for, we can get that to you. So we're in the business of trying to help you protect and grow your business. So we win when you win, and happy holidays. Thank you, everybody.